On March 2nd, 2024, the 2024 ICPC Asia Pacific Championship was held at the University of Engineering and Technology, Vietnam National University, Hanoi. It is a new playoff round introduced to the Asia Pacific region this year, where top non-winning teams from all regional contests in the region can compete to qualify for the World Finals. As you might know, I was the chief judge of the contest, responsible for preparing the tasks, the rules, and the content of the contest in general. This contest is one of the most challenging competitive programming projects I have ever taken, probably on par with hosting IOI 2022. This contest requires constant and careful coordination and collaboration with multi-nation committees from Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and other nations in the region. Each is critical to ensure the smooth operation of the contest. Well, for IOI 2022, I collaborated with mostly Indonesians since the international committees are less hands-on and are more involved with higher level decisions compared to writing code. So this contest gives me a completely new dimension of challenges. This video covers my whole experience from the very first moment I was nominated as a judge member all the way until the end of the contest. There are of course confidential materials that I wouldn't be able to share, but I'll try to share as much as I can. The script for this video was written on March 5th, 2024. All of the information in this video is correct to the best of my understanding up to the date. If any of the information is inaccurate, please let me know. I hope you enjoy this video. The idea of having a semi-final round before the World Finals for this region has been discussed by the RCDs for a while, but the execution keeps getting delayed, partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Several other regions already have this semi-final championship round, including the North America Championship in North America. In the 2023-2024 cycle, after many years of delay, the RCDs and ICPC executives finally decided to have this playoff round for this region. To talk about the very beginning of my involvement in this contest, we have to go back to May 2023, 9 months before the contest. Following an RCD meeting earlier that month, each RCD around the region was asked to nominate judge members for the contest. On May 11th, 2023, Associate Professor Stephen Halim, the RCD for the Singapore region, whom I worked on many projects with, asked me whether I want to be nominated. He pointed out that I would not be a member of the IOI International Scientific Committee by 2024 and asked me whether I would like to try for another judging challenge. Note that back then, the contest was still called ICPC Asia Pacific Playoff instead of Championship. I took some time before the May 25th deadline to think about it, and on May 21st, I responded that I was ready to take the challenge. I also affirmed that I am ready to be nominated as a chief judge. Professor Stephen mentioned that I and Amar, my fellow Indonesian friend who was completing his PhD in NUS at that time, would be jointly nominated by the Singapore and Indonesia RCDs. Fast forward to June 2nd, when Mr. Don Quelle, an organizing committee member of the contest, sent an introductory email to all of the nominated judges and set up the very first meeting for all of us. You can see that the set of names there matches the list of the scientific committee on the contest website, except that Kevin Charles Atienza has not been nominated yet. We'll talk more about that later. The meeting happened 3 days later, attended by all 7 judge members and Mr. Quay. For everyone except Amar and Hank, a Vietnamese judge member, it was the very first time I knew about them and talked to them. That meeting lasted for approximately 2 hours, so a lot of things were discussed. Fortunately, I took the minutes of that meeting, so I can tell you exactly the items that were discussed. But I won't share the full minutes. The first item was a quick introduction between the members. Next, we shared our experiences judging in our local regional contests. At this point, I immediately realized that each of us has unique experiences, which might lead to many conflicting, difficult, but great discussions later on. It was followed by confirming my role as the chief judge. Now, I won't say here whether there were other nominations for the chief judge. My first job as the chief judge was to chair the rest of the meeting and take the minutes. The next discussion item was the choice of the online text communication platform, since it is unrealistic to always use video calling all the time. The committee members represented different nations and generations with their own preferred communication platforms. It was decided that Slack will be used for now, with a note to consider once we have confidential materials. The next discussion item was the platform or framework to prepare the problems. Code versus Polygon was considered, but we agreed that it is tricky to use a platform hosted on a third-party server that requires online connectivity to work on. And unfortunately, an open source offline implementation of Polygon is not available yet. Instead, we discussed a list of offline frameworks such as Katis problem tools, but we did not decide anything in the end. The next discussion item was about interactive tasks and their limitations. I won't share much detail here on this. Now, the next discussion item was probably the most important one. We discussed that each of us should come up with a list of potential task authors who are still active in programming contests and might have an interest in submitting tasks. We also discussed rough milestones for the judges, and the first milestone was to submit the list of potential task authors to the chief judge by late July, and then the chief judge will send a call for task announcement. The milestones also covered when to close the call for tasks and so on. The last discussion items were around proofreading and external testers, but nothing was really decided at this point. At some point in this meeting, Kue told me that the technical committee will be chaired by a familiar name, Associate Professor Rie Shigetomi Yamaguchi. She was the host technical committee chair when Japan hosted IOI 2018. That was actually my first year in the IOI scientific committee, and I remember her because there were some heated discussions between the host and the international technical committee that needed some thoughts from the scientific committee as well. Anyway, it's nice to be able to work with her again, and I'm sure that this will be a productive collaboration. Now, from this meeting alone, I already pointed out a couple of discussion items that arise from our diverse experience and backgrounds. For example, in Indonesia, there is one task preparation framework that we use in many local competitions and many of us are mostly familiar with, which we can say is the standard. Thus, when organizing a competition in Indonesia consisting of local committee members, it was not really hard to decide which framework we should use. But this is clearly not the case in this contest, and you will see more of this pattern until the contest itself as well. Anyway, immediately after the meeting was over, I set up a Slack workspace, because we decided to use Slack, and invited all of the judge members to the workspace so that all text communications from this point on can be easily done in the workspace. And that is all about the beginning. Fast forward to August, there's nothing significant that happened in between, other than each of the judge members tried to come up with a list of potential task authors. To make distribution easier, I decided to use a Google group, where I asked each of the judge members to add potential task authors to the group. Unbeknownst to me, it turns out that adding someone to a Google group sends a notification email, which means that these potential task authors had an idea of who is the inviter and potentially the competition before the call for task announcement was sent out. It was intended, but not too big of a deal. After the first milestone set out during the first meeting, Kue and I drafted the call for tasks announcement. Well, at that point, only a small set of people knew that I would be the chief judge, and more people in the public knew that Kue would be the organizer. Therefore, to build up some credibility of the call for task announcement, on August 18th, 2023, Kue, instead of I, sent the call for tasks announcement to the aforementioned Google group. Okay, now comes the first major setback of this contest. Unfortunately, the announcement was detected as spam and went to the spam folder for many, if not all, Gmail users. I asked about approximately 4 of my friends whom I added to the Google group, and all of them indicated that they did not receive the announcement. When I prompted them to check the spam folder, they found it there. Well, we don't know for certain the number of people who received it in their inbox, but based on the known data, it is safe to assume that the majority of people did not get it in their inbox. To mitigate this issue, we have to personally reach as many people in the Google groups as we reasonably can and tell them to check their spam folder. Anyway, we still received some task submissions nevertheless, and we received the last submitted task on November 28th, 9 days after the deadline. However, we decided to still accept the task. We received task submissions from 7 distinct represented countries, and one of them is actually outside the APAC region. Well, unfortunately, we received more task submissions from the judges instead of the outside. This might be partly due to the spam issue. Oh, a quick interlude before we move on. I would like to tell a bit of a story about my 2 submitted tasks that were used in this contest. For problem F, forming group, the idea comes from a natural way of forming groups that we used to do at school with alternating group indices. Well, simply simulating that grouping would be a boring task, so I added 2 elements of choice. A, where the first person can stand, and B, the number of groups. The original constraint was up to 100,000 students instead of 1 million students to allow O n times dn times log n naive solutions. Keep this in mind for now. For problem B, attraction score, the idea comes from my recent interest in planar graphs. After some discussions with the participants of the 2023 Brazilian ICPC Summer School Camp in Unicamp, I learned how to enumerate all cliques in planar graphs in linear time. However, only checking for cliques is boring, so I thought of a way to allow a small number of missing edges. I finally came up with a formulation that allows at most 1 missing edge. Initially, I didn't come up with a linear time solution, so the original constraint was up to 2000 nodes. Also, keep this in mind for now. Going back to the submitted tasks, we reviewed all of the submitted tasks for approximately 2 weeks and planned to finalize the problem set in an online meeting on December 9th. Before the meeting, each task was rated by some judge members to indicate their difficulty and quality rating. While reviewing the tasks, it was apparent that one task author stood out from the rest, Kevin. He submitted many hard tasks that none of us could solve. At some point before the task review meeting, Mitsuru, the judge member nominated by Japan, brought Quace and my attention that it might be valuable to add Kevin as a judge member. To be honest, I was initially reluctant, thinking that he would also be as valuable just as a task author. However, after a couple of days, I changed my mind and agreed with Mitsuru's idea. Remember earlier that the judges were nominated by RCDs? Therefore, Quay would like to check the addition of Kevin to RCDs first, just to make sure. While waiting for formal approval, I sent some of the hard task submissions to him so that he could help us give his rating. He managed to solve them very quickly, so I kept giving him more tasks. In the end, I gave him access to all of the submitted tasks because he solved them very quickly. Coming back to my task, attraction score. While discussing the solution for attraction score, Kevin and I realized that both of our solutions and observations together could be combined into a linear time solution, which is why the task ended up with 100,000 nodes. So all of that happened before the task review meeting on the 9th. So now let's talk about the review meeting on the 9th. Unfortunately, two Vietnamese judges couldn't make it to the meeting, so we had to meet without them. We discussed the tasks and came up with a set of 13 tasks, considering the varying task difficulty and solution coverage. Actually, originally problem F was not there. However, a week after the meeting, the Vietnamese judges had some time to review the chosen tasks and pointed out that one of the tasks was a simplified version of a task in a recent contest in Vietnam. After some discussions in Slack, we agreed that this task should be replaced, and forming group is the most suitable task to replace it, considering the similar difficulty level. We also discussed that the task should require some observations instead of just the naive solution, thus increasing the constraint to 1 million students. Now that we have selected the problem set, let's talk about preparing them. For preparing the task materials, like the description, solutions, and test data, as the chief judge, I am responsible for coming up with the collaboration structure and the technical framework that we will use. For the repository location, GitHub was the most practical choice to store it. While there was some security concern with hosting it on a third-party provider, I decided that the risk was minimal and having a self-hosted repository was not practical at the moment. To provide access to the private repository to the contest judges, I needed to collect our GitHub usernames. While collecting the GitHub usernames, I realized something unexpected. In the previous chapter, I mentioned that I did not know the judges before except Amar and Hang. It turns out that I might have known Mitsuru before because I am familiar with his username, IR5. This rings a very old bell back in the day when I started programming and was active in Topcoder back in 2011. I competed in Topcoder single round matches quite frequently that year, and I saw his username a lot. And I remember this username in particular because IR5 sounds similar to Irfan, the best Indonesian competitive programmer at that time. Anyway, going back to the task preparation. While choosing GitHub as the place to store the repository is easy, choosing the framework and the repository structure are not. There are many frameworks developed by different communities over the years, and to my understanding, the competitive programming community has not agreed on one standard that covers all possible use cases yet. I considered all of the options discussed in the judges' first meeting, but none of them seemed to fit my working principles. In particular, even Katis problem tools, the framework that is supposed to be the standard when preparing tasks for ICPC, has some shortcomings. For starters, some of the dependencies are not supported for ARM-based machines, making it hard to install on the newer M-based Macs. Also, the framework does not handle generating test cases. Instead, it just assumes that the test cases are already there and only does other things like checking the test cases and running solutions on them. I learned from a bitter experience that task repositories should store test case generators instead of the test cases themselves, and that the test cases should be generated as part of the pipeline by the framework. My reasoning is that by having the test cases checked in the repository, there is no way to review the generator to verify the coverage of the test cases. Well, even if the generator is checked in separately, there is no way to verify that the test cases are indeed generated by said generator. I looked at using TestLib to generate test cases, but it turns out TestLib does not really have a feature to generate many test cases and produce the output generated by the model solution on them. I took many days to deliberate on this. I researched all of the available frameworks out there, asked people from different communities, and even tried some of the frameworks myself. In the end, I decided to refer to using the framework I am very familiar with, and used for the Jakarta Regional for many years, which is basically TC frame with my own wrapper to generate the task statement, verify test cases, and run TC frame local grading on all solutions. If you're not familiar with TC frame, it is a C++ test case generation framework that is written by Ashar Fuadi and widely used in the Indonesian competitive programming scene. I know this framework works well for me, but I worry that it might receive pushback from people outside Indonesia who are not familiar with TC frame. And it did happen. Shortly after the decision, Kevin and Mitsuru argued that having Python generators are useful and that they would be much more productive using them. Kevin gave a specific example that C++ does not have an equivalent for Python itertools. Oh yeah, at this point, Kevin was already a formal member of the judge after Quay gave the green light. Mitsuru also argued about TC frame being a black box, automatically naming the test case files, and preferred to use a foundation that has a clear working mechanism. So he suggested not using TC frame and replacing the local grading feature with a bash script to run all test cases. But I counter-argued that local grading is not as simple as it looks and that we should use a well-developed framework to do it instead of an ad hoc script. In the end, I managed to write a TC frame specification file that allows reading test cases generated by a separate custom generator and supports local grading, and having the pipeline runs the custom generator first. This custom generator can be written in any language, including Python. Mitsuru was satisfied with this approach. At this point, entering the new year, we were pretty satisfied with the framework, so we started working on the components themselves. But later down the road, while developing the task components, we still encountered some issues with the framework that we needed to improve them. The wrapper initially only supported running C++ solutions. There were discussions about whether we should write Java, Kotlin, and Python solutions as well. We decided that we should follow Word Finals rules, where each task is guaranteed to be solvable in at least 2 language groups. Therefore, we need to prepare solutions in those languages as well. Thus, I modified the wrapper to support running Java, Kotlin, and Python solutions. This was actually not trivial, since running Java solutions use huge memory for JVM and was kept getting killed by TC frame memory limitations. In the end, we hacked it by passing a sufficiently large value like 10 gigabytes for the memory limit when running a local grading using TC frame. Another issue is to build the test case generator using compiler optimization like -O2, which is not enabled by default in TC frame. This is important for complicated test case generators that can run for several minutes, since they run some kind of brute force to generate a test case with some specific intended property. Again, this is another example of something that I have not experienced working with Indonesians, but turns out this is normal outside Indonesia. There were also other minor improvements like supporting C++ input validators instead of just Python input validators. I won't discuss all of them here. Now that we finished talking about the framework, let's talk about task components themselves. We maintain a Google Sheet document tracking the progress of the task components. The rows correspond to the tasks and the columns correspond to the components like model solution, alternative solutions, test data generator, input validator, and so on. Each cell tracks the author and the status of the component. For each task, we start with writing the task statement so that the rest of the components can be written with the I/O format, sample test cases, and constraints already fixed. We decided that only 3 people experienced with writing task statements should do so: Kevin, Mitsuru, and myself. Writing task statements requires constant coordination to ensure style consistency between tasks, and having a smaller set of people makes this coordination easier. I also sent emails to task authors outside of the judges whose tasks were accepted. All of them responded that they were willing to prepare the model solution and the test data generator for their task. For some of the tasks, Mitsuru and I extended the coverage of the test data. We worked throughout the whole of January and early February to prepare the task materials. As you might imagine, there were further task-specific discussions that came up once we started implementing some solutions. One of the Vietnamese judges would like to change the story a little bit for the easiest task, Task H, to add the kinds of faux and more Vietnamese references. The same person also would like to change the input format. I also involved Amar as the task author in the discussion. There was a little bit of debate on this, but in the end, we agreed to adapt some of the story changes while keeping the input format. There were many other discussions that were minor and not really worth discussing here. Just one last thing on this chapter that I would like to say for now. I initially wanted to implement solutions for Kevin's difficult tasks as well. However, after reading the detailed write-up for his tasks, I gave up halfway and thought that this problem set is way too difficult and that I made a mistake of not realizing this early during the task review. At this point, I strongly wanted to remove one of the tasks and possibly make another task easier. Keep this in mind for now. After we were done with most of the task materials, we came back to the task statements and realized that they were actually not very well written. While only 3 of us wrote the task statements, it turned out that 3 people were enough to cause inconsistencies in our task statements. To resolve them, the 3 of us jumped into an online call. We first agreed on what styles and conventions we should follow, which Mitsuru started drafting before the call. And then after we agreed on those, we proceeded to go to each task and go through the task statement, making modifications where we felt necessary. We originally scheduled the call to be 3 hours long, but instead it ran for 5 hours, spending approximately 20 minutes on each task. So far, I have shared my experience working with the scientific committee. However, as the chief judge, it is also my duty to work with the technical committee to ensure that our technical needs are met. Similar to working with the scientific committee, the technical committee contained people who I never really worked with before. That posed some challenges as well. Remember that during the very first judges meeting, I learned that Rie will chair the technical committee? Well, I did nothing with this information until the end of 2023 when I initiated my first meeting with them. The meeting happened 5 days later, attended by Mitsuru, me, and several Japanese technical committee members working with Rie. First, we discussed the online judge, the first critical technical aspect. I learned many insights from them, such as their plan to host DOM Judge and the Judge hosts in Google Compute Engine, similar to what they did in the Yokohama region. However, when we discussed the contestants' environment, the second critical technical aspect, it turns out that it had not been discussed yet whether the Japanese or the Vietnamese would be responsible for that. Initially, I was hoping to get some insights regarding the operating system and the IDEs used, but it was clear that I wouldn't be able to get the answers at this meeting. We scheduled another meeting after the New Year, approximately 2 weeks later, this time with both the Japanese and the Vietnamese. Oh, in this meeting, I realized that most of the Japanese technical committee members are Googlers. During this meeting, we decided that the Vietnamese should be in charge of the contestants' environment, including printing. Which makes more sense since they will have access to the hardware. The Vietnamese shared their experience of using an Ubuntu image similar to the one used for the World Finals, and we agreed that we could use it for this contest as well. The meeting also covered who is responsible for covering the expenses of the GCE used by the Japanese for the DOM Judge instance, but I won't go into detail here. Immediately after the meeting ended, one of the Vietnamese committee members sent an email sharing a Telegram group link for technical coordination. Initially, I was a bit skeptical about using Telegram since Telegram does not seem to be popular in Japan. However, the Japanese did not seem to have a problem and they joined a the group shortly afterwards. This group is used regularly and very heavily until the contest ends for technical coordination, like the contestants' VM and DOM judge coordination. My next interaction with the technical committee was around mid-February, when most of the task preparation was done and it was time to deploy them to a DOM judge instance for testing. There was a mini scare where they initially couldn't get C2 instances for the judge hosts, but it was resolved before we needed it. During the testing, Mitsuru and I realized that we needed to adjust the time limit for some tasks, since the C2 instance performs quite differently compared to our local machines. Other than that, the testing went smoothly with the test instance. I will talk more about the testing in the next chapter. Even though we wrote many solutions and validators with many reviews to our task components, it's still good to have a new set of eyes to look at the tasks and test them. We would like to have proofreaders to look at the problem statements and testers to test the difficulty of the tasks and the materials. Mitsuru suggested Professor Chikayama as a proofreader and a team of 3 very strong Japanese to test the problem set. I also suggested 2 proofreaders and teams from Universitas Indonesia and NUS to test the problem set. We received great feedback regarding the task statement from the proofreaders as well as the testers. Since they had never read the task before, they pointed out some sentences where it was confusing to them when they read it for the first time. Kevin, Mitsuru, and I had another online call that ran about 2 hours to discuss the feedback and modify the task statement together. All in all, we changed the task statement for all 13 tasks from the feedback. Some of the tasks got minor wording modifications only, while some other tasks got bigger modifications. For the task difficulty, the result from the Japanese team showed that the task was not as hard as I previously thought. Remember when I said I wanted to make the problem set easier? I still considered removing one of the hardest tasks, but Mitsuru, Kevin, and the Japanese tester suggested keeping the problem set. Well, I am the chief judge, but I understand that they had more data at this point since all of them have implemented all of the hardest tasks, while I only knew the solution ideas for those tasks. So I conceded and I decided to trust their judgment on this. In the end, you saw all of the 13 tasks that we originally chose. The results of the other 2 teams are slightly worse than I anticipated. One of the teams spent some time on an easy task trying to debug their time limit solution. We decided to add a sample case to possibly help weaker teams that might fall into the same problem. Now that we were satisfied with the problem set, the task statements, and the task components, we were ready for the contest itself. Let's go to the week of the contest. All of the judges were scheduled to arrive on February 28th, one day earlier than the contestants. I arrived at noon, but most of the other committee members did not arrive until late in the evening, so there was not much I could do on that day. Well, actually, Kevin was supposed to arrive in the morning, but there was some drama that caused him to arrive at night. I won't share more about that here. I ended up spending that day just in my hotel room uploading tasks to Codeforces Polygon for the mirror contest while waiting for the other judges to arrive. After dinner, I met Kue in the hotel lobby and we chatted a bit about the plan for the next 3 days. In some of the past contests in which I was the chief judge, I was also involved in some ceremonial activities like announcing the winners. Thus, I wanted to make sure whether I also had such roles for this contest. Kue told me that was not the case, so I did not need to prepare anything. I guess that means one less thing to worry about for me. The next day, February 29th. In the morning, we visited the contest hall to see the setup prepared by the Vietnamese. There was a network issue at that time, so we couldn't really test the connectivity yet. However, I was able to test the contestants' workstation images offline. I went through all the software that we listed on the competition website, making sure that all of the promised software was there. Just as I wanted to say that everything seems okay, Hiroki, one of the Japanese technical committee members, pointed out to me that some of the documents provided in the contestants' image, like the judging details, refer to the one used in the World Finals. Again, since they used the World Finals image. It is slightly inaccurate since there are some differences in this contest, so we reported to the Vietnamese to change the files to the one we distribute on our website. After lunch, the judges were split. Lok, a Vietnamese judge member, Amar, and I went to a printing store to print task statements, while the rest of the committee members stayed in the contest hall. For the practice session and the proper contest, we printed about 200 copies for all contestants. We also printed one copy of the judging details and Dom Judge manual for each team for each day. We also put 3 copies of the task statements in the envelopes. The whole printing took about 2 hours, accompanied by a random cat in the store. When we were done at about 5 p.m., we took all of the papers and the envelopes to... maybe I shouldn't say where we kept them. An unspecified location. Meanwhile, while we were printing, at the contest hall, some judges, together with the Japanese and Vietnamese technical committee, had some kind of a contest simulation. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I only got reports afterwards. To the best of my understanding, they tested that the contestants' workstation can connect to Dom Judge and some start of the contest procedures. I don't know more details about the result of the simulation, but I know one thing. The Vietnamese decided to change the start of contest procedure to only allow contestants to log in after the contest starts. Previously, we had some discussions to allow them to do it before the contest, while being manually proctored so that they wouldn't do anything else. But it seems like the simulation changed their mind. This, of course, makes proctoring easier, but has some drawbacks in case the accounts do not work. And as you might know, it would indeed be the case on the competition day. We will talk more about this later. Shortly after I arrived at the hotel after printing, I only had time to rest a little bit before the dinner, attended by VIPs such as Ms. Veronica Soboleva, ICPC Director of Development, Professor Kakehi, the APEC Region Director, RCDs of the region, the organizers, and more. After the dinner, Tan Trong, commonly known as RR, my old friend, briefed me and other judges about recording task solution presentations for the contest live stream. Oh yeah, just days before, I learned that he would be the director and the host of the live stream. What a small world. Anyway, we discussed who should record which tasks based on our familiarity with the task. Now, I just want to point out one thing. Amar gets to record the solution for problem G, personality test. Just keep this in mind for now. We discussed a bit on the format of the recording, but in the end, other than a specific time limit, we decided that it was quite flexible and each of us was free to do whatever we wanted. After that discussion, we went back to our room and took some rest for a long day tomorrow. Good morning! Now it's March 1st, the opening and practice session day. At about 7 a.m., Amar and I went to the contest hall together with the envelopes for the practice day. We had a judges' room just beside the contest hall, so we put the envelopes and our bags there. I did some final checks for the practice session, making sure I uploaded the tasks and the contest was set up correctly. To prepare for his solution presentation recording, Amar coded his solution for task G to make sure he understood the solution correctly. He also tested some slow solutions. At approximately 9 a.m., Kwe summoned me to go to the opening ceremony hall. Fortunately, the opening ceremony hall and the contest hall are close by, so I can walk there. It turns out that shortly before the opening ceremony, In the room beside the hall, there was a meeting on a large desk with about 20 chairs, each of which has a nameplate on the table indicating who to sit where. There are also a lot of cameras and media covering the meeting. The meeting was attended by Veronica, who sat beside me, Deputy Minister of Science and Technology of Vietnam, VNU executives, and others. Yeah, it consisted mainly of speeches where Veronica mentioned how this contest was discussed many years ago, the ICPC being thankful to the host, and so on. Shortly after that, we went to the opening ceremony, where once again I had a dedicated seat on the front row with my nameplate. I sat there during the opening ceremony while receiving news that one of Amar's slow solutions managed to break our test cases. It turns out that he skipped the opening ceremony. After the opening ceremony, I went back to the contest hall together with Kevin, Mitsuru, and other judges who also attended the opening ceremony. And we discussed Amar's solution and how to break it. And it turns out that creating such a test case is very difficult with the problem constraint. And we couldn't change the problem constraint or the time limit since the task statements were already printed. I spent about 30 to 60 minutes writing some code to try to generate such a test case, but I failed. And at some point, I gave up since I needed to prepare for the practice session afterward. The practice session was delayed by about an hour since it took some time to bring the contestants into the contest hall, since the ops team had to make sure that the contestants were not bringing any prohibited materials. I coordinated with the technical committee and the host on the updated schedule, like when to start the contest, when to allow the coaches in, when to start the debriefing session, when to freeze the scoreboard, and when to end the contest. About the debriefing session, this was something that I learned when watching the World Finals live streaming, that they always had a debriefing session for all contestants to answer all of their questions during the practice session. I think this was a good idea, so I adapted it for this contest. While waiting for the contestants to come in, I did some final checks with the DOMJudge configuration. I noticed two things that I wanted to change, and I communicated this to the Japanese technical committee who deployed the DOMJudge instance. The first thing was that judging would still continue if contestants get a wrong answer, but it would be terminated if contestants get a time limit. Second thing, contestants should not be able to download their submissions following World Finals rules. They were okay with the second change, but they argued that the first change contradicted the judging details document distributed on our website, which says that submissions that get TLE and WA on different test cases are reported as TLE. This was unfortunately not what I wanted, but I considered since we should follow the document. We should probably reconsider this for future contests. The technical committee and I also played around with the ICPC presentation client so that the right tool would be displayed in the contest hall. We managed to figure it out before the contestants were ready, so it was all good. After all of the contestants were seated in the contest hall, we started the practice session. The practice session contained 4 tasks, but each task was duplicated 3 times as per request by the host. They wanted to make sure that some of the tools worked with 12 tasks. At the start of the practice session, it was clear that the contestants were confused about what to do with the VPN client. I needed to broadcast a verbal announcement that they needed to log into the VPN client first and then access the shortcut to open the browser with the DOMJudge address. Both VPN and DOMJudge credentials were available in the envelope on their desk. We should have made this more intuitive for future contests, possibly removing the requirements for the contestants to log in themselves. During the practice session, we didn't have any issues with the task nor DOMJudge, but we just received so many operational questions, like whether they are allowed to bring snacks and stationaries, about downloading their submitted code, the feedback priority, wrong clock on their machines, and many other things. There are a total of approximately 80 clarifications in DomJudge during the practice session, so I would not cover all of them here. For each of the clarifications, we replied to their question in DomJudge, as well as taking notes to address it to everyone in the debriefing session. The debriefing session happened around an hour before the end of the practice session, after the coaches were allowed on the contest floor. Long, a Vietnamese Contest Operations Committee member, together with Rie and I, conducted the debriefing session. While I did most of the talking to the contestants, we also discussed some of the new questions that we received that were not so easy to answer. Also, due to the quality of the audio system in the contest hall was not perfect, and perhaps my non-universal accent as well, some teams requested that all of my verbal messages be transcribed and announced in DomJudge. Locke helped us to do that. Oh, one thing that I would like to mention here. Some of you might have not realized it, but I accidentally leaked something during this session. While answering a question about whether there will be N balloon colors for N problems for the contest day, I accidentally said something like, yes, there will be and then I stopped talking. Yeah, as you might have guessed, I wanted to say there will be 13 balloon colors tomorrow. But then I immediately realized that we have not announced the number of tasks yet. After I said that, I was so shocked, I covered my mouth and I felt so much guilt that I could not speak for a while. Luckily, Quay was there and I passed the microphone to him, and he instead talked about having 70 balloons for each color and so on. I guess he was comparing it with other contests that have fewer balloons for some of the harder tasks. While Quay was speaking, from the bird's eye view above, I could see that some of the teams chuckled a little bit and discussed among themselves. I would assume that they caught my mistake and realized what I just did and discussed among them. Oh well. Shortly after the debriefing session was done, the practice session was concluded and the teams left the contest hall. During the whole of the practice session, it turns out that some of the judges were still trying hard to break Amar's slow solution for problem G, and Kevin was the one who managed to do so. This task already has the generator that takes the longest to run, about 15 minutes. Kevin's additional test cases were also search-based, and the final generator took almost twice as long to run. Yeah, in the end, generating the test cases for this task takes 30 minutes. But it was worth it to make tricky test cases for this task. Changing task components just one day before the contest was a dangerous thing to do, so we had as many eyes as possible to review Kevin's changes. And in the end, we decided that it was worth including this change, so I merged it and regenerated the test cases and re-uploaded them. After all of the contestants had left the contest hall, 5 of the judge members, including myself, went around the hall to check the team reference document that was left by the teams to ensure that they satisfied the requirements, like the 25-page limit. We flagged several documents that have texts that are small, since it might violate the requirement that the text must be readable from a distance of half a meter. After we finished going around the hall, we discussed the flagged documents and decided to allow all of them except one single page of a document from one team. I took and kept that page from the document. After we finished checking the documents, the Vietnamese brought us to dinner in a mall nearby. After that, we had problems booking a cab to go back to the hotel since it was Friday evening. So they asked us if we would mind taking the public bus. We didn't mind, so we took a public bus with the Vietnamese. I should say that taking a public bus in Hanoi is an eye-opening experience. Maybe I shouldn't say much detail here, but I can say that one of us mentioned that the driver of the bus drove the bus like an ambulance. I'll leave it to your imagination what that means. But yeah, anyway, after reaching the hotel, I did my solution recording for the live stream and went to sleep shortly afterward. So, good morning everyone. Today is the day we were all waiting for. Similar to the previous day, approximately at 7 am, Amar and I brought the printed task to the judges' room beside the contest hall. The contest was scheduled to start at 9 am. While waiting for the contest to start, I finally checked the tasks and the contest configuration in DomJudge, as well as in Codeforces. I also checked that some of the technical issues from the practice day were resolved. In particular, I confirmed the time zone issue in the contestant's machine has been fixed. I also talked to the team whose page from the team reference document had to be removed. I showed the document rules on the competition website and explained our decision that the page violated the rules. Now, fortunately, there wasn't much of a rebuttal from them, so it's pretty easy. They just asked which page was it and they checked around the neighboring pages. Now, there was one team that brought 2 extra copies of the document following an approval to do so from the practice day. I checked the extra copies and approved them. There was also a team who reported that their document was missing on their desk. I checked our notes from the notebook check from the previous day, and our notes indicated that the team had a notebook. Now, it is still uncertain to this day how it was missing, but it was most likely accidentally removed by volunteers when trying to clean up their space. Now, fortunately, there was still time before the contest to work with the host to print a copy of their document. And then I checked the printed document and approved it. Close to 9 am, it was clear that we could not start the contest at 9 am since some of the teams were still entering the contest hall. We postponed the official and the mirror contest by 30 minutes. The teams were ready at approximately 9:10 am. Now, to make sure that we can start the contest, I checked with several committees. The Vietnamese Technical Committee confirmed that they have changed the VPN passwords to whatever is printed on the second day envelope. The Japanese Technical Committee also confirmed that they have changed the DomJudge password as well. Well, you know that the second confirmation was not true, but I will talk about that a bit later. Because the technical committee seemed confident that we could start the contest, and I also checked the configurations and also was confident to start the contest, we advanced the contest 10 minutes earlier, thus scheduling it to start at 9:20 am. We left the Codeforces contest to avoid further confusion from scheduling changes. When the contest started, I was at the contest hall to see with my own eyes whether the contestants could log in. When I saw one team had a problem logging into DomJudge, I checked the users page in DomJudge and realized that none of the teams had logged in. I immediately rushed to the judges' room to report this to the Japanese Technical Committee. Soon after, hands started to rise from the teams to report that they could not log into DomJudge. While I was still in the judges' room, I remember Rie rushed to the judges' room and shouted something in Japanese containing the phrase DomJudge. Now, I don't speak Japanese, but I knew what she was talking about, and we assured her that the room was already aware of the issue. I went back to the contest hall to verbally announce that none of the teams could log in and they should stop asking about it. Fortunately, we gave them printed task statements so they could at least read the task from there. Hiroki, one of the Japanese Technical Committee members responsible for DomJudge, fixed the passwords and approached me in the contest hall. I asked him to test it first. We tried logging in as one of the contestants and it succeeded. I then verbally announced that they could log into DomJudge now. This announcement was made about 7 minutes after the contest started. Immediately after the announcement, one UET team submitted a solution to problem H, the easiest problem. So I could argue that the delay does not impact the contest. The contestants probably needed more than 7 minutes to read the tasks and code the solution anyway. Well, except for the UET team. They submitted the solution probably. The submitted solution was incorrect. 4 minutes later, they submitted the correct solution and become the first to solve it, but with a 20-minute penalty. 2 minutes later, the University of Tokyo team solved the same problem without the penalty. Due to Tokyo having a better time penalty, initially there was a mistake in instructing the balloon runner to give the first to solve balloon to Tokyo. The issue was fixed immediately and it was not impacting the contest in any way. There were no further issues after that, so I could safely relax in the judges' room. About 1 hour after the contest started, we broadcasted an announcement in Domjudge saying that there would be no extra time caused by the earlier issue. Hiroki then explained to me that they did reset the Domjudge passwords the day before, but the configuration file that they used to reset the passwords were updated locally but not remotely. Thus, when they ran the script remotely, they used the wrong configuration file, and the passwords were reset to a set of experimental passwords. There was no further incident until approximately 3 hours after the contest started, when I was alerted of a printer issue caused by a contestant printing a large file. I immediately went to the printing station. They immediately clarified that the issue was caused by the printer itself and not by any contestant. They tried resetting and switching printers and switching toners. Finally, the issue was fixed with a third printer. Approximately 30 minutes were lost, and they could not guarantee that no print jobs were lost. Thus, we made a Domjudge announcement to ask teams to reprint if they haven't received their print jobs. Since their balloon system also involved printing which team should receive which balloon, the printer issue also affected the balloon distribution, but this is obviously less critical than the team print jobs. After the printing issue was fixed, I went to the live stream to be interviewed by Trong. You can check the live stream footage on the ICPC News YouTube channel. Shortly after the interview finished, the scoreboard was frozen in the last hour of the contest. Some technical committee members and I checked to make sure that the scoreboard was frozen. We realized that the scoreboard in the ICPC presentation client tool shown on the big LED screen was not frozen. We immediately changed the LED screen to display the countdown timer instead. We also coordinated with the balloon runner coordinator to only give balloons to teams who have received less than 3 balloons. There were 2 minor clarifications in the last hour that are worth mentioning here. One asked about their solution for problem A being pending even after 6 minutes. Yeah, this is the problem with so many test cases and takes some time to judge. We considered an exception to our test case policy for this problem since we believe not so many teams will attempt this problem anyway. Anyway, the judging finished shortly afterward and we answered the clarification. Another team asked about a correct submission that previously got TLE. We investigated and replied that their submission was close to the time limit. I wouldn't say how close it was, but it was actually more than 5%. Now, I have to be honest, the greater runtime variance was something that I forgot to check during the testing. This is something that we took very seriously in IOI and something that we can do better next time. I spent the remainder of the last hour trying to check the balloons received by teams. Prabowo, one of the task authors whom I worked with many times in the past, helped me to do that. We went across the room and realized that there were so many teams that received the wrong set of balloons, presumably partly due to the printer issue I mentioned earlier. I was being too perfectionist, maybe, that I asked the balloon runners to fix them, even though it did not affect the contest in any way. And as far as I know, all of the balloons distributions were fixed before the contest ended. The contest ended exactly 5 hours after the contest started. Unfortunately, we had one team who did not solve any task. I sent the scoreboard to Kue so he could process it to print certificates and prepare for the awarding ceremony. And after that, I was very tired, so I took some rest in the judges' room. We just finished the hardest part of the competition and we were almost done. When I woke up from my quick nap, I saw Hank was rehearsing the awarding ceremony using ICPC Resolver. I noticed that he decided not to bother with the team photos and not to load them to ICPC Resolver. Now, I had an experience of loading team photos to ICPC Resolver before, and I knew that it was not an enjoyable experience. The tool documentation was poorly written, and I had to guess the format of these photos. I had to work with something called CDP, Contest Data Package format. But since I had the experience, I thought I knew how to do it, so I wanted to help him load the photos. I spent the next hour or so trying to get the photos from Quay as well as to load them to ICPC Resolver. However, I just realized that, to my best understanding, CDP is now replaced by the contest package format, and ICPC Resolver is not expecting CDP format anymore. Now, because of this change, even when we already had to go to the awarding ceremony hotel, I still could not load the photos. I kept trying to load the photos on our way to the hotel in the backseat of a taxi, while Hank continued to rehearse in the front seat in the same taxi. In the end, I gave up and just accepted the fact that ICPC tools are annoying software to deal with. While attending the awarding ceremony, I felt a bit of a headache, probably due to my lack of sleep the past week. While I was in Vietnam, I had only about 4 hours or so of daily sleep, about half of what I normally have. Locke sat beside me and gave me a painkiller. When the ICPC Resolver was running, Hank was the MC of the session, as you might know, and he gave some jokes. I honestly thought some of them were funny, and he knew how to make it entertaining. I was asked to present the prizes for one of the winning teams, and I was fortunate not to faint on the stage due to my headache. Anyway, the ceremony ran smoothly and there was nothing to report otherwise. After the ceremony finished, we took some photos on the stage. And then after that, we went upstairs for dinner and took some more photos with the task authors. The dinner table that I was at consisted of mostly task authors and judges. So we can finally celebrate that the competition is over. And then after the dinner, I went back to my hotel and took some rest. The following day was the excursion to Halong Bay. There was not much to report on this excursion since the contest was over, and I was attending the excursion mostly as an individual. Now, I don't want this video to be a vlog of a tourist attraction review, but one thing that I could probably say is that Halong Bay is beautiful. Unfortunately, it was quite foggy that day to be able to see far. Now, to finish this video, I would like to congratulate all the winners and the top teams who would qualify to the World Finals in Kazakhstan. Special congratulations to the Seoul National University team who won the contest. I would also like to thank everyone who was involved in this contest. Firstly, from the organizational side, thank you to the ICPC executives and ICPC Asia Pacific RCDs who finally made the Asia Pacific Championship a reality. Also, thank you to Professor Stephen Halim for nominating me to be a chief judge, and also to Quay for working with me throughout the long preparation journey. For the more technical teams, I would like to thank all the judges and task authors for their contributions. A special shout out to Mitsuru Kusumoto, who has helped me a lot, taken many initiatives, and brought many good points, issues, and discussions to my attention. Also, a special shout out to Kevin Atienza, who also provided many valuable contributions, even though he joined the team later than the others. I would also like to thank Hiroki Sato, Yu Sugawara, Rie Shigetomi Yamaguchi, Fuang Huang Long, and many more technical committee and contest operations team members. That week was probably the most intense communication and interaction I had with Vietnamese and Japanese people in my life. While language barriers and different accents might hinder our communications a little bit, I believe it was still an important and productive collaboration after all. And I learned a lot from working with all of you. I would like to conclude by saying that the contest went smoothly overall. The biggest issues from the competition side were the DOM Chats login at the start and the printing issue at the middle. There were definitely things that we can improve in the future, including those two issues and other smaller issues. While it was an enjoyable experience for me, I don't know whether I'll be involved again next year, even if nominated again. My future commitments are not clear yet, and it is still unclear whether I can take this opportunity again. However, I hope to be involved in future editions of this contest again in any capacity, and I hope to be able to see you guys again.